Hello, and welcome to another instructional video by Mrs. Struble. In this video, by the end of this video, students will be able to add rational numbers, focusing on fractions and mixed numbers. In order to add fractions or mixed numbers, both positive and negative, we're going to use the rational rules of addition. That's going to help us find out the sign of our answer and determine what process we'll use in the computations. You may also have heard these as the integer rules. Now, the rational rules of addition state this. If I have two negatives and I'm adding them together, I'm going to get another negative as an answer. Vice versa, if I have two positives, I'm going to get another positive as an answer. We're pretty much used to that one. When we have same sign, we're going to end up adding the absolute values of the numbers we're given. So I like to say this fun phrase to help us remember what to do. Same sign, we take the sum, the sign stays the same. So if the sign is the same, as in both negatives or both positives, we're simply going to add their absolute values and keep the sign. So if we start with two negatives, our sign for their answer is going to be negative. If we start with two positives, the sign is going to be two positives. So same sign, we take the sum, the sign stays the same. It's kind of a fun little riddle. Now, what if one's negative and one's positive? Whether your first one's negative or your second one's negative, what we're going to end up doing here is finding the difference between the two absolute values. In other words, we're going to subtract them. After we do this, we have to figure out which of these two values that we're given are larger. So we find the greatest absolute value, whether it's the first one or the second one. We need to determine which one is the greater absolute value. Which one, in other words, do we have more of? Do we have more positives or do we have more negatives? And that'll determine the answer's sign, whether the answer to the problem is positive or negative. So let's see this in action. If I have negative 2 4/5 and I'm adding a negative 3 2/3, step 1 always remains the same. Okay? Which one has the greatest absolute value? First, we need to determine that. Well, you don't have to look very far with these. Just look at the whole number, and we can easily see that the greatest absolute value here is the negative 3 2/3. That's going to come in handy. Okay? Step 2 then will be to use 3 questions to help guide us to figure out the answer and kind of deal with those negatives right away. So first we're going to ask ourselves, well, do we have the same sign or are they different signs? If they're the same, then we need to know we're adding. If they're different, we need to know we're going to subtract them. And then we need to think about, what is my answer going to be? Is it going to be a positive or a negative value? Okay. For this step, what I like to do, for step 2, what I like to do is make myself an equal sign. Okay. So we look at our example, and we're going to ask our 3 questions. Same or different? Well, they're both negative, so they're both the same sign. So we're going to say same. If they're the same sign, do we add or subtract? And in fact, we need to add. Okay? So I know I'm going to add. I'm going to put this addition sign right there. Then I need to determine my answer. Is my answer going to be negative or positive? Well, if they're both the same, I'm going to find the sum, which means add, and the sign stays the same. So I'm going to end up with a negative in the end. It's kind of like I'm going further negative. I owe 2, and now I owe 3 more. So 3 and some change more anyway. Okay, so I'm going further negative, which means my answer is going to be negative. Step 3 is simply to add or subtract these mixed numbers like normal. So 2 and 4/5 and 3 and 2/3. Notice I ignored the negative signs. I know which one's greater. I told you that'd come in handy. I'm going to put that one at the top. So I'm going to say 3 and 2/3 plus 2 and 4/5. Yep, 2 and 4/5. And now we're going to add these mixed numbers like we would normally. Adding them like normal, we first find the common denominator. Well, the denominators here are 3 and 5, so our common denominator is 15. Okay. And then we find our equivalent fractions based upon our new denominator. So how does 2/3 become something over 15? We're going to multiply by a unit of 1, 5 over 5. So what I like to say is what we do to the bottom, we do to the top. So 3 times 5 is 15. 2 times 5, therefore, is 10. Same thing in the second value. We're going to multiply both of them by 3, the numerator and denominator, and we're going to get 12/15. You'll know you do this step correctly if you can reduce your new fraction and it becomes your old one again. Adding like normal, now we add the numerators up and the denominator stays the same. So how many 15ths do we have? We have 22 15ths. Okay. Then let's not forget our whole numbers. We have a total of 5. Now, our answer is going to be -5 and 22 15ths. However, that's called an improper fraction. We have more numerators, more pieces than one. Okay, more than one piece here. Solving that, or simplifying that rather, okay, we have to ask ourselves how many wholes are there? Well, there's one. There's one group of 15 in there, and there's 7 left over. Okay. Using a little trick, 1 and 7 15ths. We're going around the clock. So 22 15ths is the same thing as saying 1 and 7 15ths. We're going to add that to our 5, and we're going to get a total of 6 and 7 15ths, remembering that, hey, this is going to be a negative answer. Let's try another one. So in this example, we have 2 and 5/6 plus -2 and 7/8. We have one positive and one negative. So using our steps to help guide the way, step 1, we need to figure out which one of these is the larger absolute value. This is going to help us determine which number to place in the top position when we're adding or subtracting. Oops. So let's see here, right here. Now 5, 6, 2 and 2 are equivalent. So that doesn't really help us. We got to take a look into the fraction part. We have 5/6 and 7/8. We need to compare these in order to see which one is larger or which one is greater. There's a couple ways to compare fractions. Let's use the common denominator. Okay? So a common denominator is just a multiple that both of them have. So multiples of 6, for example, would be 6 times 1 is 6, 12, 18, 24, and so on and so forth. Multiples of 8 are 8, 16, 24, 32, and so on and so forth. Okay? We're looking for a number that's a multiple of both of these, and that is 24. Okay, so our common denominator would be 24. And now we have to make equivalent fractions. So we're asking ourselves, how did we go from 8 to 24? Well, we multiplied by 3. Now what we do to the denominator, we need to do to the numerator, so that we're not changing the fraction, we're just making it a smaller piece so that we can compare it with another fraction more easily. So doing the same to the other, we multiplied by 4, so we're going to take the numerator and multiply it by 4 and get 20. Now we have 20 24ths and 21 24ths. Okay. Since we have a common denominator now, we can easily see that 21 is the larger. 21/24 is the larger. That means -2 7/8 is our largest absolute value. So we're going to circle that and identify that as our larger one so that we can utilize that information later on. Moving on to step 2 now, we have our 3 questions. Same or different, as in what are the signs? So we have one positive and one negative. That means different. We have different signs. If the signs are different, we take the difference, which means we're going to subtract. So again, what I like to do is I like to set up that addition or subtraction problem right away. We know we're going to subtract, so put a nice little subtraction sign there. Okay. Our third question here is, what is our answer going to be? What do we have more of? That's where that step 1 comes in handy. So step 1 is the larger of the two, so we have more negatives, which means our answer is going to be a negative. Okay. Step 3 is just to set it up properly and add or subtract like you would a normal mixed number. I like to make it a good habit to put that larger value first. So 2 7/8, we're ignoring that negative. We already took care of our signs. Okay, so we're just ignoring that. So it's 2 7/8, and we're subtracting 2 5/6. Okay. Subtracting mixed numbers, we have to have that common denominator. Well, we already knew our common denominator from step 1. Our common denominator is 24. And that gave us 21 and 20 right here. These are our new fractions. We just made them equal in comparison to each other, okay? So that we can do the subtraction as needed. So we have 21/24 minus 20/24. We're going to subtract the numerators and keep the denominator the same. So 21 minus 20 gives us 1, and 24 stays the same. Now we do the whole numbers because we don't want to forget those guys. And we end up with 0. We don't have to put the 0, so our answer is -1/24. So with you, I have done an example of if they're both negative, same sign, or what if one of them's negative and one of them's positive. Why don't you take this next example, pause the video, try it out for yourself, and see how you do. Now that you've paused the video and tried it on your own, you should have come up with an answer of -2 3/10. Here's how. Step 1 is to identify the greater absolute value, and that's easy to see because we have 6 and 4. So 6 is the greater absolute value. Step 2, 3 questions. Same or different? In fact, these two are different. We have one positive and one negative. So that tells us we're going to take the difference and subtract these two values. So I'm going to go ahead and put my subtraction sign there. Then I need to ask myself, well, what's the answer going to be? The answer is going to be a negative because we have more negatives than we have positives. Okay, we have more negatives than we have positives, so we know our answer is going to be negative. Step 3 then takes it a bit further and says, hey, all right, you dealt with the negative. Let's do this problem like you would normal fractions, making sure that that larger value is first. Okay. Setting it up, we need a common denominator in order to subtract. This common denominator is 10. Okay. 5 times 2 equals 10. So therefore, the new numerator in the top one is 8. Okay. 2 times 5 equals 10 down below. So the new numerator is 5. 8 tenths minus 5 tenths gives you 3 tenths left. And then 6 minus 4, 2. So our answer there is -2 3/10. That concludes this video with adding rational numbers, focusing on fractions and mixed numbers using our rational rules and a step-by-step process of kind of breaking it down.